Every Christmas Day, Chief Uche distributes fattened chickens to the villagers, earning their trust and admiration. What the villagers don't know is that the chickens are no ordinary gifts, they are what you might call cursed. Before we begin the story, please comment below and let us know where in the world you are watching from. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more interesting stories. In the prosperous Igbo village of Obiọha, a wealthy and enigmatic man named Chief Uche is celebrated for his generosity. The sun had barely risen over the serene village of Obiọha when the first crow of a rooster echoed across the lush green landscape. Life in the village was simple, yet full of color. Farmers tilled their lands, women carried pots of water on their heads with rhythmic grace, and children's laughter punctuated the stillness. But the most motivating figure in the village was undoubtedly Chief Uche. "Take this chicken and rejoice." Chief Uche's deep, authoritative voice rang out as he handed a plump white chicken to an elderly woman, Mama Udo. Her face lit up with gratitude as she bowed slightly, clutching the chicken to her chest. "Chief, may your barns overflow, and your days be long. You are truly the hand of Chukwu in this village," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. Chief Uche smiled, his teeth white against his dark, weathered skin. He adjusted his red cap, a symbol of his chieftaincy, and waved her off. Around him, villagers buzzed with admiration and whispered about his endless generosity. It was Christmas Day, and Chief Uche's grand gesture of giving out chickens had become a tradition. But there was something unsettling about him, something that only the most observant would notice. His smile never quite reached his eyes, and the air around him seemed colder than it should have been under the blazing sun. By mid-morning, the village square was alive with activity. Stalls overflowed with yams, cocoyams, cassava, and baskets of fish. Amid the chatter and the bartering, Chief Uche sat on a carved wooden stool under the ancient Udara tree, his crimson wrapper gleaming in the sunlight. Beside him, two boys stood holding a wicker basket filled with chickens, their feathers glistening like snow. "Chief! Chief!" A young man, Obidi, approached, bowing slightly. "The gods will continue to bless you. My mother sends her greetings and asked me to thank you for the chicken you gave her last Christmas Day. It's the fattest she's ever seen." Chief Uche chuckled, his voice low and rich. "The gods have been kind to me, and as they bless me, I must bless my people. Go, take another for your household." Obidi's face lit up with joy. "Thank you, Chief. Truly, you are a father to us all." As Obidi reached for a chicken, a sudden gust of wind swept through the square. The wicker basket trembled, and the chickens clucked loudly, their beady eyes gleaming unnaturally. Obidi hesitated, his hand hovering over the basket. "Take it, Obidi," Chief Uche urged, his voice calm but firm. The young man quickly grabbed a bird, bowing once more before hurrying away. Nearby, Matsi Ugachukwu, the village's palm wine tapper, watched the scene intently. He leaned against his bicycle, his arms crossed. There was a faint frown on his face. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over Obiọha, Matsi Ugachukwu sat outside his hut, sipping from a gourd of fresh palm wine. His wife, Neka, sat beside him, weaving a basket. The gentle hum of cicadas filled the air. "Nne," Ugachukwu began, breaking the comfortable silence. "Does it not strike you as odd that Chief Uche gives away so many chickens? Chickens that are so fat and healthy, yet he remains the wealthiest man in the village." Neka paused, her fingers stilling on the basket. "What are you saying, Ugo? Are you accusing Chief of something?" "I'm not accusing," Ugachukwu replied, his brow furrowing. "I'm merely wondering. Where does he get them from? And why does he do it? He's not married, he has no children to provide for. Who truly benefits from his wealth?" Neka shook her head. "Ugo, Chief has been nothing but kind to this village. Don't let your curiosity lead you into trouble. Remember what happened to Nyameka when he questioned the elders last year. This is different," Ugachukwu muttered, taking another sip. "There is something off about that man. Mark my words." As night fell deeper, the village square became eerily quiet. The chickens given away earlier that day seemed restless in their new homes. In Mama Udo's compound, the bird she had received scratched furiously at the ground, its eyes gleaming unnaturally in the moonlight. Mama Udo, feeling uneasy, stepped out of her hut to check on the bird. "What is wrong with you, eh?" she murmured, approaching cautiously. The chicken stopped scratching and turned to look at her. For a moment, its eyes appeared human, a fleeting image of a face she thought she recognized but couldn't place. Her breath caught in her throat. "Chinik me," she whispered, stumbling backward. The chicken let out a low, guttural cluck before returning to its usual behavior, pecking at the ground as if nothing had happened. Mama Udo hurried back inside, bolting her door. She sat by the fire, clutching her rosary and muttering prayers under her breath. Meanwhile, in Chief Uche's grand compound, the man himself sat in a dimly lit room, a clay lamp casting flickering shadows on the walls. Before him was a small wooden shrine adorned with feathers, bones, and strange carvings. In the center of the shrine sat a bowl filled with a dark, viscous liquid. Chief dipped his fingers into the bowl and whispered an incantation. The air in the room grew heavy, and a faint, otherworldly hum filled the space. The chickens in the village, wherever they were, momentarily froze, their heads cocked as if listening to a silent command. "Your hunger shall soon be sated," Chief murmured, his voice taking on a chilling timbre. "The souls are ripe for the taking." The shadows on the wall seemed to dance, forming grotesque shapes that twisted and writhed. Chief smiled, his eyes glinting with an unnatural light. The next morning, Obiọha awoke to news that chilled the villagers to their core. Obina, the young man who had taken a chicken the previous day, was found unconscious in his family's hut. His skin was pale, his breathing shallow, and no one could wake him. Uche, hearing the commotion, rushed to the scene. He pushed through the crowd that had gathered, his heart pounding. As he looked at the boy's lifeless form, a cold dread settled over him. "This is not an ordinary illness," he said quietly, his mind racing. "Something evil is at work here." The villagers murmured in agreement, their faces etched with fear. But who could they blame? And who could they turn to for answers? Chief Uche, standing at the edge of the crowd, watched with a calm expression. His hands were clasped behind his back, and his lips curved into a faint smile that no one seemed to notice. "We must pray to the gods for guidance," he said solemnly, his voice carrying over the murmurs. "And until then, we must remain united. Fear is the enemy here." The crowd nodded, their trust in Chief unwavering. But Uche felt a shiver run down his spine. He glanced at Chief, and for a brief moment, their eyes met. In Chief's gaze, he saw something dark, something that confirmed his growing suspicions. "This is far from over," Uche muttered to himself, turning away. Far from over? The moon hung low, casting a ghostly light over the village of Obiọha. The evening air was thick with an unsettling silence, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant croak of a night bird. The streets, usually alive with laughter and the chatter of children, now lay eerily still. Even the crickets had fallen silent. Inside his humble home, Uche could not shake the unease that had gripped him all day. His mind raced, replaying the events of the past few weeks, the sickness, the strange sounds at night, the shadows that seemed to creep closer with every passing hour. The gifts from Chief Uche, the chickens that had been freely given, now felt like an omen, a curse masquerading as charity. Nena, his wife, entered the room, her eyes tired and her voice laced with concern. "Matsi, what is troubling you? Your eyes are heavy with worry." He shook his head, not yet ready to voice his fears. "It's nothing, Nena. Just the weight of the world. I need to clear my mind." But as the night deepened, a sound echoed through the village, a familiar, unsettling cluck, like that of 1,000 chickens calling in the darkness. It was faint at first, but it grew louder, more insistent. Uche's stomach turned. He had heard that sound before, each time it came a little closer, as though following him. Nena caught the flicker of his expression. "You heard it again, didn't you?" she whispered. He nodded grimly. "It's coming from everywhere, Nena. The sound, it's like the chickens are everywhere." As if on cue, a sudden cough broke through the silence. Uche turned sharply, his heart sinking as he saw his son, Chijioke, standing in the doorway, his face pale and his body trembling with fever. "Chijioke, what is it?" Why are you up? Matsi Ugachukwu rushed to his son's side, his voice frantic. I don't feel well, Papa, Chijio croaked, his voice weak. My chest hurts. It feels like something is inside me. Nena's eyes filled with worry, her hand resting on her son's forehead. He's burning with fever, Matsi. Something is wrong. The sound of clucking grew louder in the distance, filling the room with an eerie presence. Matsi Ugachukwu's thoughts spiraled. Could this sickness be connected to the chickens? Could it be the work of something far darker than he could understand? Without saying another word, he moved swiftly toward the door. I'll go speak to Adise. She will know what to do. The herbalist's hut sat at the edge of the village, deep in the shadows of towering trees. The faint glow of firelight flickered through the cracks of the wooden walls, casting distorted shadows against the earth. Matsi Ugachukwu knocked softly before entering. Adise looked up from her work, her sharp eyes studying him carefully as he stepped inside. Her movements were slow, deliberate, as though she knew why he had come without him having to speak a word. Matsi Ugachukwu, she said quietly, her voice a low murmur. What brings you here in the middle of the night? I fear for my people, Adise, he replied, his voice heavy with worry. My son is sick. Others too, and the strange clucking grows louder with each passing day. Something is wrong, and I do not know what to do. Adise remained silent for a long moment, her eyes never leaving his. The room felt colder now, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. Finally, she spoke, her tone unwavering. The gods are silent, she said simply. Matsi Ugachukwu stared at her, confused. What do you mean? Surely, the gods will answer. They must. Adise shook her head slowly, a sad smile tugging at the corner of her lips. The gods speak when they will, but sometimes, they remain silent. It is not for us to understand why. But I can tell you this, Matsi, something stirs in the darkness. Something we cannot see, but we feel it. It is not the work of any man. It is something else. Something else? Matsi Ugachukwu repeated, the weight of her words sinking into him. You know something, Adise. Please, tell me what is happening. Adise stood and walked to the far corner of the room, where bundles of dried herbs hung from the ceiling. She reached up, running her fingers over them thoughtfully before returning her gaze to Matsi Ugachukwu. There are forces at work in Obiọha that none of us can understand. Powers older than the land itself. But as for who or what it is, the gods are silent. Matsi Ugachukwu's heart raced. This was not the answer he had hoped for. But my son, the villagers, they are suffering. How long can we wait for answers? Adise's face softened, her eyes filled with an unspoken sorrow. The answer may not come in the way you expect. But you must trust in the gods, Matsi. They will guide you when the time is right. But for now, there is nothing we can do. You must wait. The next day, Matsi Ugachukwu returned to the village, a heavy dread weighing on him. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the homes of Obiọha, but it did little to dispel the unease that had taken root in every corner of the village. As he walked down the path toward his home, he saw villagers gathered near the market square. Their murmurs reached his ears before he could even approach. They spoke in hushed tones, their eyes glancing nervously at one another. At the center of the group stood Chief Uche, his usual smile absent, replaced with a furrowed brow. Matsi Ugachukwu. Chief Uche called out, his voice carrying over the murmurs. There you are. Matsi Ugachukwu's heart sank. The last thing he wanted was to be drawn into the spotlight, but the villagers were already turning their eyes toward him, accusing. There you are, Matsi, one of the villagers spoke up, her voice laced with anger. We've all heard the stories, Matsi. We've seen our children fall ill, our animals wasting away. What is happening to us? You've been going to see Adise, haven't you? She's been telling you something, hasn't she? Is she behind all this? Matsi Ugachukwu's mind spun. No. I haven't. But before he could finish, another voice rang out from the crowd, cutting him off. This all started when you accepted the chickens from Chief Uche. You brought them to us, Matsi. What did you think would happen? Tell us, Matsi, another man added, his voice shaking with suspicion. You've been to the herbalist, to Adise. What are you hiding from us? Is she the one who's put this curse on us? Or are you involved in it? Matsi Ugachukwa's face flushed with heat. The crowd closed in, their eyes accusing, their whispers sharp. This is not the time for suspicion, Matsi Ugachukwu called out, raising his voice. We need to be united. My son is sick, yes, but this is not the work of one man or one woman. We must. You brought this curse on us, a voice yelled from the back of the crowd. It's your fault, Matsi. You've led us into this. The words hit him like a blow. His heart raced as the village turned on him, their accusations drowning out his voice. No one wanted to listen. No one cared for explanations. They were desperate, and in their desperation, they needed someone to blame. The mob began to close in around him, their faces twisted with fear and anger. Matsi Ugachukwu stood frozen, his mind a storm of confusion. What had he done wrong? Had he been too slow to act? Had he failed his people? As the villagers' voices rose, Matsi Ugachukwu realized that, for them, the answer was simple: he had become the scapegoat. In their eyes, he had brought the curse to Obiọha. Let us know in the comment section if you want to find out what happened next in this story.